A flash of silk, a smear of blood, a silence that changed everything. One moment of arrogance would ignite a storm that no badge could contain. What happened next wasn't rage, it was reckoning disguised as calm. Hit like, subscribe for more real justice stories, and tell us where you're watching from. This one will stay with you long after it ends. A black man in a spotless white silk shirt stood before the concrete fortress of the 15th Precinct, the early morning sun sliding over his shoulders like gold poured on glass. His name was Langston Morrow, a man whose silence carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths. The air around him felt charged, though he barely moved. His shirt gleamed against the gray of the street, his stance too calm for this rough corner of the city. To the passing eye, he looked like a businessman who had wandered too far uptown, or a professor misplaced among patrol cars and cigarette smoke. In reality, he was neither. Langston had arrived an hour early on purpose. His official introduction as chief of police wasn't until 9 o'clock, but this quiet, unannounced moment was the real beginning of his command. He wanted to see the truth before the greetings, before the masks. The 15th Precinct had a reputation for arrogance, the kind that fed off silence and fear. Langston, a black officer who had risen through the hardest posts, knew that culture didn't hide behind paperwork. It strutted in daylight when it thought no one of consequence was watching. He leaned slightly on the metal rail eyes, moving slowly from the tinted glass windows to the battered door where officers came and went. He wasn't watching architecture. He was studying behavior, the posture, the laughter, the tone of men who carried authority like a weapon. He knew what rot looked like. He'd seen it bloom in the halls of power before. He came here to cut it out, not with speeches, but with proof. The heavy glass doors burst open, and 3 officers spilled onto the steps mid-conversation. Calder Hensley, a thick-necked veteran with too much confidence and too little conscience, led the trio. Behind him came Roe Dillard, a man who survived by imitation, always laughing a split second after his superior. Silas Wynn, the youngest, followed quietly, still trying to believe that the badge meant something sacred. Calder noticed Langston first. "Well, look at this peacock," he barked, smirking. "You lost Slick." His tone wasn't curious, it was territorial. Roe chuckled obediently, while Silas hesitated, the muscles in his jaw tightening. Langston didn't respond. He didn't even blink. His gaze was steady, the kind of calm that made insecure men fidget. That stillness irritated Calder more than any insult could. He stepped forward, the scent of burnt coffee and old ego on his breath. "Hey, I asked you a question," he said, voice lowering into something meant to intimidate. Langston tilted his head just slightly. "I'm just admiring the building," he replied, his voice low, even, and deliberate. Calder's smirk faded. The answer wasn't what he expected. It wasn't fear or apology. It was observation. It was control. "Admiring the building," Calder repeated mockingly. "You hear that, boys? He's an architecture critic." Roe laughed again, louder this time. Maybe he's scoping out his new cell. But Silas's eyes darted from Langston's expression to Calder's hand, which was already twitching near his belt. Langston's calm remained absolute. Inside, his mind was working. Names, badge numbers, tone of voice recording everything like data. Years of internal affairs work had made him a living archive of misconduct. He didn't need to provoke. He needed them to reveal themselves. Calder moved closer, so close the morning light drew 2 shadows into one. "You got ID?" he demanded. Langston's lips barely curved. "Do I look like someone committing a crime? You look like someone out of place," Calder shot back. "People like you don't hang around cop stations unless you've got a reason." "You'd be surprised," Langston murmured. His eyes flicked briefly toward the precinct doors, noting how they opened and closed behind other officers who barely noticed what was happening outside. It told him everything. This behavior wasn't rare. It was routine. Calder, sensing he was losing control, took another step. "Don't play smart, man. I'm asking again, who are you?" Langston's tone softened, almost kind. "That's the question, isn't it?" For a brief second, Calder hesitated. The stranger's confidence unnerved him. He looked at Roe for backup, but Roe only shrugged, grinning. "He's clean cal. Maybe just a guy waiting for someone. No, Calder muttered, his pride flaring. No guy dressed like that waits outside a precinct unless he's looking for trouble. He stepped forward again, closer this time, his bulk casting a shadow across Langston's polished shoes. You think that shirt makes you better than me? Langston didn't move, didn't blink. No, he said quietly. It just makes it easier to spot the stains. Calder froze, not understanding the words, but understanding the tone. It was authority disguised as calm. It was a man who didn't fear consequences because he was the consequence. The sound of traffic faded. For a moment, the world shrank to that small patch of sidewalk, that power imbalance teetering on the edge. Then Calder laughed, forced and ugly, turning to Rowe. This guy's funny. Maybe he's one of those YouTube prankers. Should I give him something to post? Rowe chuckled, glancing at Silas, who still hadn't moved. But Langston stayed silent, and that silence burned. He wasn't challenging Calder's dominance. He was dismantling it without a word. A man used to fear found himself reflected in composure, and didn't like what he saw. You think I'm joking with you? He said. Langston didn't blink, didn't even shift his weight. His stillness irritated the man in front of him because it robbed him of what he wanted most: reaction. The silence stretched until it became power. Rowe Dillard, trying to match Calder's energy, snickered behind him. Maybe he's a lawyer, he said. You know, one of those rich types that like to sue people for fun. Calder gave a half smile that never touched his eyes. If he's a lawyer, he's about to get a practical demonstration of police procedure. The sound of that sentence hung in the air like a warning, but Langston's gaze remained fixed, calm as an unbroken mirror. Inside his mind, a different kind of work was happening. He was cataloging details: the smell of cheap cologne mixed with coffee, the twitch in Calder's jaw every time he spoke, the way Rowe's laugh trailed half a beat too late. These were tells the little betrayals that revealed who people were when they thought no one important was watching. And he had already seen their names before today, Hensley and Dillard both mentioned, in a dozen civilian complaints over 5 years. One dismissed for lack of evidence, another resolved internally. Langston remembered every line. He'd read those reports the night before, and now here they were, standing in front of him, delivering the proof that the paper couldn't capture. His silence wasn't submission, it was a mirror. It reflected everything wrong with them until they couldn't stand their own image. Calder stepped closer, his boots loud on the pavement, trying to shatter that silence. You got an answer? Pal Langston met his stare and spoke softly. Not to your question. That answer, too deliberate to be accidental, caught Calder off guard. He frowned, unsure if he'd been insulted or ignored. What's that supposed to mean? He barked. Langston didn't reply. He just studied him, that slow, quiet scrutiny of a man who had nothing to prove. And that calmness, that absence of fear, was like acid on Calder's pride. You think you're better than me? Calder asked, louder this time. Rowe tried to diffuse it with a joke. He's just standing there, Cal. Probably waiting for his Uber or something. But Calder didn't hear him. The world had narrowed to that single man in the silk shirt, that stranger who didn't flinch. Langston tilted his head slightly, and for the briefest moment a hint of a smile crossed his face. Not arrogance, just recognition. He'd seen this scene before, in 100 different forms in different cities with different uniforms. Every corrupt precinct had a Calder Hensley. Every reform started with one man's ego cracking in daylight. I asked you a question, Calder said again, voice trembling between anger and insecurity. Langston's answer came like ice. And I'm still deciding if you deserve one. The pause after that felt endless. Rose stopped laughing. Silas the rookie shifted his stance, uncertain whether to intervene or stay silent. His eyes darted to the precinct doors, half expecting someone to step out, but no one did. The street noise faded into the background hum of tension. Calder's face darkened. You got a smart mouth, don't you? He muttered. We'll see how long that lasts. He took another step closer, his chest brushing Langston's. The movement was meant to intimidate, but Langston didn't give ground. The difference between them wasn't in size or rank, it was in certainty. Calder needed to assert control to feel it. Langston carried it naturally. His calm was the kind that couldn't be taught, only earned through years of walking into rooms where his uniform made him a target twice over for his authority and for his skin. He'd survived worse than Calder Hensley long before this morning. He looked at the man's badge again, not with fear, but with precision. "Badge 714, he said softly, repeating the number just loud enough for the rookie to hear. "You keep your hands busy, Officer Hensley. Always something to prove." Calder blinked, thrown off by the fact that the stranger had read his badge and spoken his name as if logging evidence. "How do you know my name?" he demanded. Langston smiled faintly. "It's written all over your behavior." Rowe frowned, confused. "You talking crazy, man?" But Calder understood enough to feel threatened. He stepped back half a pace, then caught himself forcing a laugh to hide the unease. "You think you're clever, huh? You don't know who you're dealing with." Langston's gaze sharpened. "Neither do you." It wasn't loud, but it was final. Silas swallowed hard, his fingers brushing the edge of his radio, but he didn't move. Something about the man in front of them didn't fit the story they were telling themselves. He didn't sound like a civilian. He didn't carry himself like one either. His confidence wasn't defensive, it was inherent. Langston turned his eyes toward the building again, letting Calder simmer in his own confusion. He knew what would come next. It always did. When men like Calder lost control of a conversation, they tried to reclaim it with force. And when that happened, Langston would have everything he needed. The sun had climbed higher, and the reflection on his silk shirt was almost blinding now. The irony wasn't lost on him. The white shirt, once a symbol of purity, now stood as a deliberate challenge against the dirt that tried to disguise itself as authority. Calder shifted his stance again, his patience burning out. "Last chance," he growled. "Tell me what you're doing here." Langston's reply came quiet and even. "Starting my day." The answer made no sense to Calder, but it didn't have to. It was the truth, and soon enough everyone would understand it. The rookie finally spoke, voice low and uncertain. "Maybe we should just leave him, Cal. He's not bothering anyone." He couldn't stand it, this quiet black man looking straight through him, reading him like a page already written. "You're really starting to piss me off," Calder growled, his tone more defensive than dominant. Rowe laughed nervously, hoping the sound would disguise the tremor in his voice. "Man, Cal, maybe let it go. He's not worth the trouble." Calder shot him a glare sharp enough to silence him. Langston stayed motionless. That patience wasn't weakness. It was control disguised as composure. Inside his mind was a machine, cold and exact. He was watching not just Calder's rage, but the way it spread like fire to the others. Rowe's eyes darted between the two men, calculating which side of power to stand on. Silas the rookie looked like he wanted to step in, but didn't have the courage. Langston's silence was teaching him something that no academy ever could. That real authority didn't need to shout, and real men didn't need to prove it. Calder took another step closer, nose to nose, his breath harsh, his pride wounded. "I said, 'Who are you?'" Langston met his gaze, unblinking. "Someone who remembers everything," he replied, softly. The answer threw Calder off balance. He didn't understand it, and that made it worse. He needed this stranger to flinch, to back down, to give him some sign of submission. Instead, Langston stood there, silent and unmovable. His calm, an indictment sharper than words. Calder's anger was no longer about respect. It was about the humiliation of being unseen. He stepped back half an inch, then lunged forward with an open palm, shoving Langston squarely in the chest. The move was practiced, rehearsed through years of intimidation. Langston absorbed the impact without budging. His feet stayed planted, his shoulders didn't rock. That stillness, so absolute, so deliberate, was the worst insult Calder could imagine. The man he'd just shoved didn't even acknowledge it as an act worth noticing. A flush rose in Calder's cheeks, part rage, part disbelief. "Oh, you think you're tough," he spat, shoving again harder. Langston's voice came quiet as snowfall. "You think too much about toughness." That line hit deeper than the shove. Calder's face twisted, and before anyone could stop him, his fist swung, a blur of motion and pride. The sound of contact echoed through the air like a crack of thunder. Langston's head turned from the blow, his jaw tightening as blood painted the corner of his mouth. Rowe gasped, half in shock, half in thrill. Damn, Cal, he shouted, as if he were watching a game, not a crime. Silas took a small step forward, whispering, "Stop, that's enough," but Calder didn't hear him. The adrenaline had taken over. Langston lifted his hand to his mouth and looked at the blood on his fingers. The droplet gleamed dark red against the pure white of his shirt, a perfect mark of violence and clarity. But what Calder saw next unsettled him far more. Langston looked back at him, not with anger, not with fear, but with cold, dissecting interest. His eyes had changed. They were no longer soft with patience. They were sharp, calculating, measuring. Calder stumbled half a step back, though he couldn't say why. It wasn't guilt. It was instinct, the kind of instinct that warned a man when he'd picked a fight he couldn't possibly win. "You done?" Langston asked quietly, his tone unreadable. Calder puffed his chest, trying to reclaim the upper hand. "Yeah, I'm done talking," he said, but the edge of his voice betrayed him. Langston wiped the blood from his lip and examined it like evidence. "You're not," he murmured. The words made Calder bristle. "You saying something, tough guy?" Rose snickered again, desperate to keep the tension from swallowing him. But even he could feel the shift. Something in the air had changed. Calder's dominance was cracking, and Langston hadn't moved an inch to make it happen. The rookie Silas whispered again, "We should stop Cal. He's not like shut up." Calder barked, cutting him off, but there was panic creeping into his tone now. He didn't understand this man in front of him. He didn't understand why that look, calm and watchful, made his stomach twist. He tried to fill the space with words. "You think you scare me? You think because you got some fancy clothes you can stand here like you own the place?" Langston's voice came low, even. "No," he said, "because I already do." The words hung there, quiet, but final. Calder's face went slack for half a second, not from understanding, but confusion. He didn't know who this man was, but that confidence was too real to ignore. Langston took one slow breath, his eyes shifting from Calder to Rowe, then to Silas. He saw three men bound by fear, one addicted to control, one feeding off approval, one too scared to act. He'd seen this triangle of corruption before, always starting with one rotten center. His hand, lowered from his lip to his side, relaxed, but the look in his eyes grew colder. He had all he needed. Every second of this was being logged in his mind, the verbal abuse, the physical contact, the witnesses. He didn't need to hit back. He needed them to keep talking. That was how men like this destroyed themselves. Calder sneered. "Go ahead, say something now. You like big words?" "Huh, let's hear one." Langston tilted his head. "Accountability," he said softly. Rowe frowned. "What the hell does that mean?" Langston smiled faintly, though there was no warmth in it. "You'll learn." That's when Calder noticed something he hadn't. Before the woman across the street with her phone raised the construction worker who'd stopped hammering the small gathering of people watching. They'd been so focused on asserting dominance that they hadn't realized they'd built a stage, and now the audience was recording every second. Calder's pulse spiked. "You better put that phone down," he yelled at the woman, but his voice cracked, betraying his fear. Langston didn't turn toward her. He didn't need to. His calm had already shifted the crowd's focus. It was no longer a cop controlling a situation. It was a man in a uniform losing it. His knuckles ached, his heart raced, but the thrill of dominance was gone, replaced by something heavier, stickier, and unfamiliar. Langston Morrow stood perfectly still, one hand now at his side, the other dappled with the red smear of his own blood. His expression hadn't changed. If anything, it had softened not with fear, but with the quiet certainty of a man who knew he had already won. Across the street, a woman with a small dog froze mid-step, her hand instinctively pulling out her phone. The dog barked once, sharp and quick, as if announcing what had just happened. Behind her, a construction worker leaned over the scaffold, railing his gloved hands, gripping metal eyes, narrowing as he realized this wasn't a routine argument. From a corner coffee stand, another man stopped stirring his drink, his phone rising to record. The scene had changed now. The air was no longer just charged. It was alive with witnesses. Calder's pulse stuttered, but pride is a cruel thing. It doesn't let men stop when they should. "Put that damn phone down," he barked at the woman. She didn't. Her camera stayed steady, the red recording light blinking like an accusation. Langston took a single step sideways, aligning himself with the crowd's view, the light glinting off his white shirt, the blood shining darker now against it. His mind was running faster than the chaos around him, processing angles, positions, timing. He had spent his entire career in internal affairs learning how to build an airtight case from half a moment of misconduct. This was not half a moment. This was a masterpiece of self-destruction unfolding in real time, and he was the quiet architect of it. Inside the precinct, Sergeant Eldon Pike sat in front of a wall of monitors, sipping burnt coffee and staring at the flickering images from the external security cameras. At first he thought it was another civilian disturbance, nothing unusual for this neighborhood, but when he zoomed in and saw Hensley's raised fist, his stomach turned cold. Pike had been in uniform for 25 years. He'd seen every shade of abuse, every excuse officers made when adrenaline became an alibi. But something about the man in that white shirt stopped him. It wasn't the clothes or even the blood, it was his posture. He didn't look like a victim. He looked like someone taking notes. Pike muttered under his breath, "Oh no, not today." He reached for the phone, intending to call Captain Vale upstairs, but something in the video made him pause. The man Langston had turned his head slightly, his eyes flicking toward the cameras. Not panic, not even curiosity awareness. It hit Pike all at once. This man knew exactly where every camera was. He wasn't caught off guard. He was orchestrating it. Back outside, Calder's breathing grew uneven. He kept shouting words, tumbling out without purpose. "You think you can stand here and disrespect me?" he said, but his voice cracked midway through. The woman's phone zoomed closer. Roe Dillard's own phone was still recording, though his smirk had vanished. Silas Wynn's hands were shaking now. He wanted to stop it, but fear chained him in place. Langston wiped his lip again, his voice quiet but clear. "You should stop now." Calder stepped closer, rage and confusion warring behind his eyes, or what he demanded. Langston looked past him towards the crowd, then upward at the tinted windows of the precinct. "Or you'll remember this moment for the rest of your life," he said. He wasn't threatening, he was predicting. Calder turned slightly to look where Langston's eyes had gone, and for the first time saw the reflection of himself. In the glass, the uniform, the clenched fist, the crowd watching. It was the image of everything wrong with the badge staring back at him. Roe finally muttered, "Cal, maybe we should pull back, man. Cameras everywhere." Calder snapped at him. "You shut your mouth, I've got this." But his confidence was fraying. The rookie spoke up louder this time, his voice cracking. "Sir, people are filming, maybe we should shut up." Calder roared, spinning toward him, and in that motion his authority fractured. The balance of power shifted visibly. The crowd's murmurs grew. Someone whispered, "Is that officer hitting him?" Another voice, "I'm getting this live." The sound of the word live made Calder flinch. Langston saw it, the panic behind bravado, the first tremor of realization. He didn't move to fight back or explain himself. He just stood tall, letting the world rearrange its understanding of the moment. To everyone watching, it was clear the aggressor wore a badge. The victim wore composure. Inside the precinct, Pike stood up, muttering again, "Oh God, no. This is bad." He turned toward the hallway, ready to find Captain Vale, but his eyes caught one more flicker on the monitor. The man outside the one being shoved had adjusted his stance again, just enough to keep his face framed between two camera angle, one from the building, one from the street. It was surgical precision. Pike felt a chill run through him. This wasn't an accident. This man wasn't random. This was someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Outside, Langston folded his hands loosely in front of him, his blood-stained shirt catching the breeze. The sunlight made the red seem brighter, almost ceremonial. Calder saw it and mistook the calm for arrogance. "You think this is funny?" he barked. "You think you can just stand there and make a fool of me?" Langston finally looked him directly in the eye. "No," he said softly. "You're doing that yourself." Roe winced at the words. The rookie let out a tiny breath, like someone realizing too late that they were standing at the edge of a cliff. Calder clenched his jaw, scanning the crowd for some kind of support, but every set of eyes watching now belonged to the world outside his control. The badge on his chest had become meaningless in the presence of so many witnesses. Langston watched the power drain from the man like air from a punctured tire. He didn't enjoy it, he never did, but he recognized it. This was the moment when corruption met accountability, and it always looked the same: panic hiding behind anger. A siren wailed in the distance, unrelated but perfectly timed, slicing through the tension. Calder flinched, glancing at the sound, and Langston spoke again, quiet but commanding. "That's what truth sounds like," he said. Calder blinked, confused, but the crowd understood. His mind screamed at him to end it, to walk away, but his pride wouldn't allow it. He'd already crossed the line, and now the only way he knew to prove he was still in charge was to go further. Langston stood motionless, calm and upright, the blood on his lip now dry and dark, the mark of Calder's mistake shining under the morning sun. "Hands on the wall," Calder barked. His voice was loud, too loud, a desperate man's echo. Langston didn't move. "You're not hearing me," Calder growled, stepping closer, shoving him backward until his shoulders hit the cold brick facade of the precinct. The sound of the impact drew gasps from the bystanders. Calder leaned in his breath, sour, his hands already moving toward Langston's sides. "You want to play smart, fine? Let's see what you're hiding." Rowe snorted, pulling out his phone again, angling it just so he could record from behind Calder's shoulder. "Oh, this is good," he whispered. "Fake tough guy's gonna fold real quick." Silas didn't move. His face had gone pale, his hands shaking slightly at his sides. He had joined the force to protect people, not to become the kind of man he'd just watched throw a punch at an unarmed stranger. He wanted to stop it, but the code, the unspoken, poisonous code of silence, kept him still. Langston's voice came out low, steady, and sharper than steel. "You're about to make the biggest mistake of your life," Calder sneered. "You already made yours standing here." With one swift motion, Calder slammed his forearm against Langston's chest to hold him still, then began patting him down, roughly, shoulders, pockets, waist, legs. Langston didn't resist. He let him. Every shove, every illegal touch, every shove of fabric was a line being crossed in front of half a dozen cameras. Calder didn't even realize that each second was tightening the noose around his own career. "Nothing," Calder muttered, irritated, before motioning to Rowe. "Check his jacket." Rowe grabbed the neatly folded blazer draped over Langston's arm. He rifled through the inner pockets, laughing. "Well, look at that. Big spender." He pulled out a leather wallet and flipped it open. Hundreds, a platinum card, a driver's license. What'd I tell you, Cal, flashy type? Probably some drug money in here, too. He waved the bills mockingly at the crowd, as if they were trophies. Langston's eyes narrowed. "You're stealing now?" he asked quietly. The question wasn't angry, it was diagnostic. Calder ignored it, stepping closer again. "I said shut your mouth." His hands moved lower toward Langston's beltline, and when he found nothing, his frustration only deepened. "He's clean," Rowe said, trying to keep the mood light, but even he sounded uneasy now. The audience watching from across the street had grown. Phones were raised higher. A city bus slowed passengers pressing against the windows to see. Calder couldn't think straight anymore. He could feel the eyes feel judgment searing through the badge he once thought made him untouchable. "He's hiding something," Calder muttered more to himself than anyone else. His hand shot toward the jacket Rowe was still holding. "Give me that." He reached into another inner pocket and froze. His fingers brushed against something solid, smooth, and metallic. A triumphant smirk spread across his face. "Bingo," he said, pulling out a leather badge case and holding it high for everyone to see. The crowd went silent for a heartbeat, waiting for context. Rowe's grin returned. "Oh, what do we got here?" he said, leaning in. "Impersonating an officer man. This just keeps getting better." Calder's laugh was harsh, humorless. "You picked the wrong place to play pretend." He shoved the open badge case toward Langston's face, the gold glinting under the sun. "That's supposed to scare me." Langston looked at it quietly, his expression unreadable. The corners of his mouth curved not in amusement, but in recognition. "You should look at it more closely," he said. Calder rolled his eyes. "Yeah, sure." He turned the case toward Rowe and Silas. "Look at this, boys. Our silk shirt superstars carrying props." Rowe took a step closer, glancing at it. Looks real, though. That's the point, idiot, Calder snapped. These fakes are good. That's a felony right there. He turned back to Langston. You just earned yourself another charge, pal. Langston exhaled slowly, shaking his head once. You really don't get it. His voice wasn't angry, it was pitying. Calder's jaw tightened. What did you just say to me? I said. Langston replied, eyes meeting his with piercing calm. You don't understand the ground you're standing on. Calder stepped closer again, brandishing the badge. I understand perfectly. You're a liar pretending to be something you're not. Langston's response came cool and level. I've never pretended a day in my life. Inside the building, Sergeant Pike was watching the scene unfold on the monitors, his heart hammering against his ribs. He'd seen the badge now zoomed in close enough to read the inscription. It wasn't fake. It was a genuine internal affairs identification from another state. An old model, yes, but real, bearing the name Langston Morrow, and a gold seal that no counterfeiter could mimic. Pike's throat went dry. He'd heard the name before years ago. Morrow was known across the department as the man who dismantled a corrupt precinct in Detroit, the man Internal Affairs sent when things were beyond repair. Pike grabbed the phone, dialing Captain Vale, his voice tight. You need to get down here, right now. Outside, Calder was still ranting, waving the badge case as though it was evidence instead of the most damning object he'd ever held. You're going to jail, tough guy. Impersonation resisting may be obstruction if I'm feeling generous. He tossed the words carelessly, but there was panic behind them now. Rose's voice cracked slightly. Hey, Cal. What if it's not fake? Calder glared at him. You think some random guy's walking around with a real badge? I don't know, man, Rose said, backing up half a step. Just saying, what if? Calder snapped. Shut up. He turned back to Langston, who still hadn't moved from the wall, who still wore that unbearable calm that was now starting to feel like judgment. Langston's voice dropped low, almost whispering. You just committed assault, illegal search and theft, all on camera. Calder laughed, but it came out hollow. You think anyone's gonna believe you? Langston's eyes flicked toward the crowd of cameras. They won't have to believe me, he said. They'll see you. The words froze Calder mid-breath. It wasn't what Langston said, it was how he said it. The tone of someone who had already won. Inside, Pike was running down the hallway toward Captain Vale's office, shouting, It's him! She wanted the 15th precinct to look like a place worth saving, not one that needed saving from itself. But Pike's face stopped her cold. He was pale, eyes wide with something that looked almost like fear. Ma'am, he stammered, you need to get outside now. It's the chief. For one impossible second, she thought she had misheard him. What about the chief? He's here, Pike said breathlessly, and Hensley he hit him, ma'am. But she didn't wait for him to finish. She was already moving. Her heels clicked hard against the tile floor as she strode down the hall, past the desks, the chatter dying behind her. The words hit him, echoed in her head. It couldn't be true. Calder Hensley might have been arrogant, but even he wasn't that suicidal. The front doors of the precinct loomed ahead, glass and metal shimmering under the morning sun. As she pushed them open, the sound hit her. First a low murmur of a crowd, the hum of camera phones recording the distinct tone of something gone terribly wrong. The scene unfolded in front of her like a nightmare in daylight. There, against the brick wall of her own building, stood a tall black man in a torn white silk shirt, blood marking his collar, his face calm but hard. And in front of him, like children caught with stolen matches, stood Calder Hensley, Roe Dillard, and Silas Wynne. Her gaze went first to the crowd, then to the phones, then to the badge in Calder's shaking hand. Her instincts screamed at her before her mind caught up. What in God's name is going on out here? She demanded. Her voice sliced through the noise, commanding attention instantly. The crowd fell silent, the officers turned, and for a second, even the city seemed to stop moving. Calder spun toward her, startled, his mouth opening and closing before he managed. Captain Vale, we were just handling, she cut him off sharply. Handling what, officer? She descended the steps, her eyes scanning the scene like a hawk's. Why is this man bleeding? Why is there a crowd recording you assaulting someone on our front steps? And what is that badge you're holding? She saw it clearly now, glinting in Calder's trembling fingers. A real badge, a captain's badge from another state. Her stomach turned. The air thickened around her as she approached. Langston hadn't moved an inch. His gaze flicked briefly to her, recognition and disappointment crossing his features in a fraction of a second. She understood it immediately. He wasn't just another man caught in an altercation. He was assessing her too. Her authority, her command, her control, or lack of it. She'd seen that kind of look only once before, years ago, when Internal Affairs came to audit her previous department. The man standing before her now had that same aura. Composed, unshaken, judicial. Captain Calder stammered this individual was loitering suspiciously and resisted when questioned. We believed he was impersonating an officer. Impersonating Arden's tone dropped an octave, her disbelief obvious. You're claiming the man holding an authentic captain's badge was impersonating. Rowe tried to jump in. We were just doing procedure, ma'am. He wouldn't answer questions, silence. She barked, and Rowe froze, eyes wide. Her attention turned back to Langston. The calm on his face was devastating. He wasn't defensive, wasn't pleading, wasn't even angry. He simply looked disappointed. Sir, she said carefully, can you please identify yourself? Langston straightened, slightly, wiping the faint trace of blood from his chin with the back of his hand. Captain Vale, he said evenly. I was hoping to meet you under better circumstances. His voice carried authority, the kind that came from habit, not effort. Her mind raced. He knew her name. She hadn't introduced herself. Pike's words came back like a lightning strike. It's the chief, no, she whispered, the color draining from her face. Calder blinked, confused. Chief, he echoed the word, empty, meaningless. Langston nodded once, slow and deliberate. Langston Morrow, he said, his tone cutting through the silence like a blade. Chief of Police. The reaction was immediate and electric. The crowd gasped. Rowe's phone slipped from his hand, clattering to the pavement. Silas's breath caught audibly. And Calder Hensley, the man who had thrown the punch, looked like he'd been shot. The badge in his hand trembled, then fell, hitting the concrete with a sound that might as well have been a gavel. Arden Vale's face went still, every muscle frozen between professionalism and pure horror. She had spent weeks preparing for this man's arrival meetings, memos, briefings about his strict expectations. She had warned her officers repeatedly, we do not give Chief Morrow a reason to question this precinct. And now, before her very eyes, 3 of her own had handed him the perfect reason, the perfect scandal on a silver platter. Langston's gaze shifted from her to the men before him. I believe he said quietly, we've clarified who's impersonating whom. Calder's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His skin had turned gray, his throat dry, his pride completely gone. He stepped backward instinctively, tripping slightly over the curb. The crowd's phones caught every second. Arden felt the blood rush to her head, but her training forced her voice steady. Everyone step back, she ordered. This scene is now under official investigation. Officers Hensley, Dillard, Wynne, stand where you are. Do not move. She turned to Langston. Chief! She started, but he raised a hand. No explanations. He said, his tone still composed, though now laced with quiet fire. You'll have time for those later. She swallowed hard. The word stung more than any accusation. The authority she thought she commanded now felt hollow. This man had been standing under her roof for less than 10 minutes, and already he owned the entire building without even raising his voice. She turned to the rookie first. Wynne, she said sharply. What happened here? Silas's voice trembled, but his conscience finally found air. Ma'am, he didn't do anything wrong. He was just standing there. He stopped himself, glancing at Calder, who glared at him with venom. Langston intervened gently. Let him finish. The rookie looked up at him, meeting the chief's gaze, and felt something unfamiliar, permission to tell the truth. They started it, he said. He didn't resist. They hit him. The confession fell like a hammer. The crowd murmured again. Calder's voice broke through, desperate now. That's a lie. He was acting suspicious. Enough. Vale snapped, cutting him off. She'd seen enough, heard enough. The truth was written all over the scene, the blood, the badge, the trembling hands. Calder's eyes darted to Langston, then back to his captain. He wanted to run to escape the humiliation burning through him, but there was nowhere to go. Langston straightened his voice, steady, precise. Langston Morrow bent down slowly, picked it up, brushed the dust from it with a quiet deliberation, and slid it into his jacket. When he straightened, the calm that had carried him through the morning sharpened into authority. "Captain Vale," he said, his tone precise as a command. "This is now a crime scene. Secure it." Her training responded before her shock could. "Yes, Chief." She turned to her officers. "Everyone back 10 feet now. You with the phones don't move. You're all witnesses." The bystanders obeyed instinctively. Even the ones recording seemed to understand that history had just shifted on its axis. Langston looked directly at the 3 men in front of him. Officers Hensley, Dillard, and Wynne, he said, his voice echoing against the stone steps. "Place your hands on the wall. Interlock your fingers behind your heads." Calder stared at him, trembling eyes wide with disbelief. You can't." "I can," Langston said quietly. "And I will." The steel in his tone left no room for interpretation. He wasn't the bleeding stranger anymore. He was the law, and for the first time in years it was being enforced without bias or favor. Roe Dillard tried to stammer something, an excuse, maybe a plea, but Langston silenced him with a glance. "Do as I said." The rookie Silas Wynne moved first. His hands went up, his expression torn between shame and relief. He wanted to argue that he had tried to stop it, that he wasn't like them, but the truth was written in his silence. Langston watched him turn to face the wall, then looked to Calder. The older man's chest heaved with each uneven breath. "You hit me, searched me, and humiliated me in front of my department," Langston said evenly. "Now you'll answer for it in front of yours." Calder's mouth worked, but no words came. His pride, his armor had cracked, and behind it was only fear. Captain Vale's voice carried over the crowd. "Disarm them." She motioned to 2 nearby officers, neither of whom dared question her. They approached cautiously, removing service pistols, knives, and tasers from the trembling men. Calder flinched when his weapon was taken, as if a part of his identity had been torn away. Roe's voice shook. "Captain, please, we didn't know." "That's exactly the problem," Vale said coldly. "You didn't know who you were abusing and you did it anyway." Langston's eyes remained fixed on Calder. "You see," he said softly, "authority isn't the uniform. It's the integrity behind it." His lip was still bleeding, his shirt still torn, but his presence filled the space more completely than any weapon could. Inside the precinct, Sergeant Pike stood by the glass doors, watching through the tinted pane. He could see everything: the crowd, the chief, the officers with their hands raised. He felt something rare stir in his chest, hope. Maybe finally the rot was being cut out. The sound of sirens swelled in the distance. Internal Affairs, called by Pike minutes earlier, was already en route. Captain Vale relayed orders crisply over the radio. "Perimeter lockdown. No one leaves the block without clearance from the chief." Her voice faltered slightly on the last word. Chief. Even now it felt surreal. Langston stepped forward, standing between the arrested men and the crowd. "Listen carefully," he said. "You are being charged with felony assault conspiracy, filing a false report, and violation of civil rights under color of law. You have the right to remain silent. I strongly suggest you use it." His voice, calm and formal, rolled out with the precision of a practiced recitation. The cameras captured every syllable. The crowd erupted in a mix of disbelief and awe, phones tilted higher, shutters clicking like applause. Across the street, a news van screeched to a halt. A reporter jumped out, microphone in hand, shouting to her cameraman, "Get this, get all of it." By noon, the video would hit every screen in the country. But for now, the world was focused on this single intersection, on one man bleeding but unbowed. Calder's knees weakened, his palms pressed against the cold brick. He tried to steady his breathing, but it came in short, uneven bursts. He could hear Roe muttering prayers under his breath. Silas stared straight ahead, tears pooling in his eyes. Captain Vale stepped closer to Langston. "Chief Internal Affairs is 5 minutes out," she said. "We've locked the area down." Langston nodded once. Good. Then quieter, he added. You'll oversee the processing yourself. No delegation, no shortcuts. Understood, she said, voice firm again. But inside, she was reeling. This man had been assaulted on her doorstep, and instead of anger, he was issuing orders like a general who had already accounted for every variable. He turned toward her, then lowering his tone. Captain Vale, he said, you have one chance to rebuild this precinct. Don't waste it defending the undefendable. She swallowed hard. Yes, sir. He gave a brief nod and faced the crowd. You all witnessed what happened here, he said. Keep your footage. The truth doesn't need editing. The spectators silent a moment before broke into murmurs of agreement. Someone shouted, That's justice. Another said, Finally someone holding them accountable. Langston's gaze swept the crowd not for glory, but for assurance. The story would spread, but it wasn't about him. It was about the disease inside the department, the sickness of impunity. This was only the first incision. The whine of approaching sirens drew closer, then stopped abruptly. A line of black sedans pulled up, their doors opening in perfect synchrony. 4 internal affairs agents stepped out, followed by a state investigator in a gray suit. The lead agent nodded to Langston. Chief Morrow, he said, his tone a mix of respect and disbelief. We received your call. You're late, Langston replied, without a trace of humor. Begin your documentation, full procedural record. The agent gave a sharp nod and motioned to his team, who began photographing the scene, logging evidence, and collecting statements. Calder finally broke his silence. Please, he whispered. I didn't know who you were. Langston turned his gaze on him, eyes like polished obsidian. That's exactly why you did it. The words cut deeper than any reprimand. Calder's body sagged against the wall, his last illusion of control slipping away. The reporters shouted questions, now their microphones raised over the heads of the crowd. Chief Morrow. Is this how your first day begins? One called out. By the time the sun had shifted past noon, the world already knew his name. Langston Morrow, the black police chief assaulted by his own officers on the steps of his new precinct, was no longer a local headline. It was a national reckoning. The footage shot by bystanders had gone viral before the first arrest report was even filed. Dozens of angles captured every moment. Calder's sneer, the punch, the shove, the blood, the calm way Langston reclaimed control. The hashtags multiplied by the minute hash. Justice on the steps, hash Chief Morrow, hash reform starts here. News anchors replayed the scene on a loop, narrating it like an unfolding parable of power, prejudice, and consequence. But inside the 15th precinct, there was no celebration, only silence and dread. The corridors that once buzzed with chatter were now quiet as a morgue. Every officer knew that the man walking through the halls, still wearing the same blood-stained shirt, was not just a superior, but a storm in human form. Langston didn't change. He didn't wash off the blood. He wanted them to see it, to remember it. It wasn't decoration. It was evidence. Captain Vale walked beside him, her jaw tight, her eyes fixed forward. Chief, she said quietly, Internal Affairs has begun seizing records. They're asking for your authorization to expand the search. Langston nodded. Expand it, no limits. I want every personnel file, every disciplinary report, every complaint in the last 10 years pulled. Yes, sir, she said, her voice steady, though her hands trembled. They reached the bullpen where officers sat, pretending to work their eyes, darting between screens and the floor. Langston stopped in the doorway, surveying them. Some looked away in shame. Others met his gaze with blank defiance. He recognized both expressions. They were the twin masks of guilt and fear. Every one of you, he said, his voice calm but cutting, is going to decide what kind of department you work in, starting now. No one moved. Even the air seemed to pause. I won't fire you for someone else's crimes, he continued, but I'll bury anyone who hides them. His words hung heavy in the room. The old order had just been broken, and the people inside could feel the pieces shifting under their feet. From the far corner, Sergeant Pike stepped forward holding a manila folder. Chief, he said, we found something in the archives. Langston took it, flipping through the documents. It was a pattern complaints filed and dismissed signatures of the same officers as witnesses. The same justifications repeated like a script. Who handled these reviews, he asked. Pike hesitated. Lieutenant Granger, sir, retired last year, but his brother still runs the union. Langston's jaw tightened. Corruption never ended with one man. It was a chain, and he had just pulled the first link. Get me his personnel file, Langston said, and every internal review he signed off on. Today. Pike nodded and disappeared down the hall. Vale spoke softly beside him. Sir, this could go deep. Maybe farther than you think. Langston's reply was quiet but final. Then we dig deeper. Outside, the precinct had become a spectacle. Reporters lined the barricades, cameras flashing as helicopters hovered overhead. From the steps where blood had fallen that morning, the story was spreading to every corner of the city. Commentators called it the turning point, the awakening the day accountability finally wore a badge. But Langston didn't care about slogans. He had spent too many years watching the cycle of outrage and forgetfulness. What mattered now was endurance, the slow, painful process of dismantling what men like Calder had built. He turned to Vale again. Has the DA been briefed? They're waiting for you at City Hall, she said. Press conference in an hour. Langston exhaled through his nose, the only sign of exhaustion. Good. Make sure Hensley, Dillard, and Wynn are transferred to holding. No special treatment, no contact with union reps until after booking. Understood, Vale said. And Chief, the mayor's office wants to review your statement before you speak. Langston stopped walking and looked at her. They can watch it on TV like everyone else. His tone left no room for discussion. In that moment, Vale realized that this man hadn't come to manage the department, he'd come to rebuild it, even if it meant burning everything down. Inside the conference room, the internal affairs team worked like surgeons. Files were spread across tables, laptops open, evidence tagged and logged. The agents, seasoned and expressionless, moved efficiently. One of them, a wiry woman named Teresa Dunn, looked up as Langston entered. Chief, she said, we found irregularities in over 24 use-of-force cases. Most were signed off by the same supervisors. Names, he asked. Granger, Lowe, and Becker, she replied. And at least one of them is still active. Langston nodded slowly. Pull them all in, quietly. We'll deal with the rest after the press conference. She gave a sharp nod. Understood. As he turned to leave, his reflection caught in the glass, again blood on white silk eyes, steady mouth set. For the first time, he allowed himself a single fleeting thought. It had to be this way. He had spent a lifetime watching prejudice wear uniforms, watching systems defend their own sickness. Maybe this was what it took, a public wound to heal a private disease. As he stepped out of the room, his phone buzzed. It was an unknown number, but the message was simple. You made enemies today. Langston read it twice, then deleted it. Enemies were the price of progress. Outside, the crowd beyond the barricades had tripled. Reporters shouted his name as he descended the steps towards the awaiting convoy. Flashbulbs burst like fireworks. The roar of voices, questions, and camera shutters blended into a single, relentless sound. Captain Vale followed close behind her voice, barely audible over the noise. They'll try to spin this, sir. They'll say you staged it, that it was theater. Langston gave a faint, humorless smile. And I hope they enjoyed the performance, he said, because the real show starts tomorrow. The motorcade pulled away, escorted by black SUVs and police cruisers. Inside the car, the city blurred past the windows. Langston loosened his collar slightly, his fingers brushing the faint bruise on his jaw. The ache was deep, but the message was deeper. Pain could be weaponized if carried with dignity. When they reached City Hall, he stepped out to another storm of cameras. The podium awaited, flanked by the mayor and the district attorney. Langston didn't read from notes. He didn't need to. What happened this morning, he began, wasn't an accident. It was exposure. The sunlight finally reached a place that's been dark too long. The officers who had once strutted through the halls with untouchable arrogance now walked quietly, waiting for the summons that could end their careers. Langston Morrow sat in the captain's office, not behind the desk, but in front of it, his sleeves rolled up a stack of personnel files beside him. He had replaced the polished welcome mat with a simple one that read, "Accountability." The irony wasn't lost on anyone who entered. Captain Vale stood by the window looking out at the precinct courtyard where 2 black vans waited ready to transport more officers to the disciplinary division downtown. 17 suspensions in 24 hours, she said quietly. The union's already threatening legal action. Langston didn't look up from the papers. "Let them," he said. "They'll fight to protect the disease. I'm fighting for the cure." He signed another dismissal order and placed it neatly atop the pile. Hensley Dillard and Wynne were symptoms. This place is the infection. Vale crossed her arms. "You know what they're saying about you, Chief. I don't care what they're saying. They're calling it revenge." Langston finally looked at her. "Then they've mistaken justice for vengeance. I didn't come here to humiliate them. I came here to make sure they never humiliate this badge again." Vale studied him for a long moment. There was something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Not anger, but endurance. The kind of weariness that comes from fighting battles long before anyone noticed the war. Internal Affairs has traced connections between Hensley's patrol unit and a local bail bonds company, she said. Kickbacks for arrests, falsified reports, overtime, scams, the works. "Who's tied to it?" Langston asked. "Lowe and Becker, both supervisors." "Then they're done," he said flatly. "File the charges, seize their accounts, and have their badges collected by end of day." She hesitated. "That's half the senior staff, Chief. Then we'll promote new ones," he replied. "People who remember what service means." Vale nodded slowly. "There's one more thing. Someone's been leaking internal updates to the press. It's making the department look like it's tearing itself apart." Langston stood walking to the window beside her. "It's not tearing apart," he said. "It's shedding dead skin." Outside, reporters still lingered by the barricades waiting for another statement. The world wanted drama. He was offering discipline. "Find the leak," he added. "But don't silence them. Sometimes sunlight needs a messenger." She smiled faintly, despite herself. "You don't do anything the easy way, do you? If it were easy," he said, "someone would have done it before I got here." Downstairs, Sergeant Pike was leading Internal Affairs agents through the evidence room. They cataloged everything confiscated drugs missing from inventory cache, envelopes logged under false tags, broken chains of custody. The further they dug, the uglier it became. Pike stopped at one cabinet, reading the signature on the last logged entry. "Granger," he muttered. The name came up again and again like rot beneath fresh paint. "Chief's not gonna like this." Upstairs, Langston's phone buzzed. Pike's voice came through the line. "Sir, you'd better come down here." Langston was already moving. Vale followed. The evidence room was dim lit by flickering fluorescent lights. Pike handed Langston a folder. Inside were photos, records, and internal memos, proof that high-ranking officers had been selling confiscated property through intermediaries funneling profits into dummy accounts. Langston flipped through the pages, expression unreadable. "Who else knows just us," Pike said. "And if word gets out, the department's reputation." The department's reputation, Langston interrupted, was destroyed the minute they thought this was acceptable. He handed the folder back. "Lock it down. No leaks until we're ready to announce charges. I want arrests, not rumors." Pike nodded. "Yes, Chief." As Langston turned to leave, Vale caught his arm. "You're taking on an entire culture," she said. "They won't all go quietly." "Then we'll be loud," he replied. The next morning, Langston held a closed-door meeting with the remaining officers. The atmosphere was tense, the air heavy with expectation. "Every one of you chose this job to serve," he said, pacing slowly. "But somewhere along the way, this precinct forgot what service looks like. It started treating citizens like suspects and power like privilege." He stopped, looking directly at them. "That ends now." An older sergeant in the back raised his hand. "Chief, with all due respect, we've been through reform talk before. It never sticks." Langston met his eyes. "That's because it never hurt enough to change. This time it will." The room went silent. "You want to be proud of your badge again," he continued. "Earn it. Starting today, every complaint that comes in will be reviewed by a civilian oversight panel. Every use of force incident will require full documentation. and every officer who stands by while another breaks the law will answer for it as if he committed the act himself. Murmurs rippled through the room. "You can't run a force like that," someone muttered. "Watch me," Langston said. His voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. It carried the weight of someone who had faced worse than their disapproval. After the meeting, Vale caught up with him in the hallway. "You just declared war on half the department," she said. "Good," he replied. "It means I'm aiming in the right direction." Over the next 2 weeks, arrests came one after another. Supervisors, detectives, even clerks tied to cover-ups. For every name that fell, 2 more surfaced. Langston worked 14-hour days, his blood-stained shirt finally replaced with a crisp uniform, but the same resolve behind it. Vale stood beside him through it all, her initial doubt hardening into loyalty. She'd seen chiefs come and go, each one more concerned with politics than justice. But Langston Morrow was different. He didn't play defense, he led offense. Late one night after the precinct had emptied, she found him still in his office reviewing files under the flicker of a desk lamp. "You ever sleep?" she asked. "When it's done," he said. "And when will that be?" He looked up at her, the faintest trace of a smile touching his lips. "When no one here remembers what fear feels like." The silence stretched between them, heavy but alive. 5 years later, the 15th precinct looked nothing like the fortress of arrogance it once was. The walls that had absorbed decades of corruption now bore murals painted by local artists, scenes of community unity and renewal. The same steps where Langston Morrow had been punched and humiliated were now polished stone, etched with sunlight and engraved with 3 simple words: "Integrity begins here." Every recruit who entered for training was required to touch the engraving before stepping through the doors. It had become a ritual, not superstition, but remembrance. Langston stood at the bottom of those steps, older now, his hair silvered at the temples, but his eyes as clear and steady as the day he'd walked into that fire. The city behind him hummed with life, freer and quieter somehow. The reforms he'd enforced had spread beyond these walls. Civilian oversight boards now existed in every precinct. Body cameras were mandatory, complaint reviews were public, and no officer, regardless of seniority, stood above accountability. He had become something unexpected. Not a politician, not a celebrity, but a symbol of discipline earned through restraint. His story was taught in academies as the day the system faced itself. Yet for all the reverence, he felt no pride, only responsibility. Captain Arden Vale, now deputy chief, joined him on the steps. Her uniform immaculate, her expression soft. "They're dedicating the new academy wing in your name next month," she said. Langston smiled faintly. "They should name it after the people who never stopped believing the badge could mean something." "It already does," she replied. "You made sure of that." He didn't answer, only gazed up at the precinct windows, reflecting the afternoon light. For a moment, the image of his younger self flickered in the glass, the man in the white silk shirt, blood dripping down his chin, standing unbroken against 3 officers who didn't see his humanity. He remembered the sound of the crowd, the flash of phones, the sting of injustice, and the calm that had steadied his hands when rage might have ruined him. That day had forged the foundation of everything that followed, not through violence or revenge, but through unyielding composure, the quiet assertion that power without integrity collapses under its own weight. "How's Pike?" he asked suddenly. Vale smiled. "Retired last month. He's teaching mentorship seminars at the academy. Says he finally believes in rookies again." Langston nodded slowly. "Good. He earned that peace." "And when promoted," she said. "Detective now. Leads the duty to intervene task force. Calls it his penance." "Then maybe the system works," Langston murmured. "Maybe it just needed a reminder." They stood in silence, the air cool and calm, the city noise fading into background rhythm. Across the street, a group of teenagers walked by, laughing, pointing at the plaque on the wall. One of them read it aloud, "Integrity begins." Here then added, "That's the dude, right? The one who didn't fight back." His friend nodded. "Yeah, he didn't need to." The words drifted to Langston's ears like a prayer, answered years late. He looked down at his hand, still strong, but lined now, and thought about the journey between then and now, the investigations, the trials, the betrayals, the nights when reform felt like an illusion. Yet every time he doubted, he remembered that single drop of blood falling on silk, how something so small could stain, but also reveal. Justice, he had learned, wasn't about punishing the guilty. It was about protecting the soul of those who could have become them. "You ever regret staying?" Vale asked quietly. After all the backlash, the lawsuits, the threats, Langston exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. "No! You can't rebuild a house by walking away from the ashes. You think they get it now?" she asked. "The city?" "The country, some do," he said. "Some never will. But truth doesn't need everyone. It just needs enough." A gust of wind brushed across the steps, carrying with it the faint scent of rain and asphalt. Langston tilted his head toward the sky, the light flickering across his face. "You know," he said softly, "when as they hit me that morning, I realized something. They weren't attacking a man. They were attacking the idea of accountability. And the only way to win was to stay standing long enough for them to see themselves clearly." Vale looked at him, the weight of his words anchoring in her chest. "And did they?" He nodded. "Eventually." From somewhere behind them, a new recruit exited the building, young and uncertain, his uniform crisp, his eyes bright with ambition. He hesitated before stepping past Langston, recognizing him instantly. "Chief Morrow," he said with awe. "I read about what you did here. It changed everything." Langston smiled gently. "Then make sure it stays changed." The recruit nodded and continued down the street, his pace steady, his posture straight. Langston watched him go, then looked once more at the steps where it had all begun. He ran his fingers across the engraved words, tracing the grooves. The stone was cold, but the message was warm. "Every system fails," he said quietly, almost to himself. "The question is whether we let the failure define us or refine us." Vale turned toward him. "And what did it do for you?" Langston's eyes lifted to the horizon, the city skyline glowing in the setting sun. "It refined me," he said. "It took everything ugly I'd seen and turned it into purpose." He started down the steps, his footsteps measured each one, echoing softly in the quiet afternoon. "The funny thing about justice," he added, "is that it never comes fast. But it never forgets either." As he reached the bottom, a gust of wind lifted the edge of his coat, revealing the faint outline of the same badge Calder had once mocked, now polished and gleaming. He touched it lightly, a reminder that redemption wasn't found in punishment, but in persistence. When he reached the sidewalk, he turned for one last look at the precinct. The mural above the doors caught the last of the daylight, an image of open hands holding a shield, surrounded by the words, "To serve with honor." Langston smiled, faint and true. The battle was over, but the message would live long after him. He walked away into the fading sun, not as a hero, but as a man who had proven that quiet strength could shake the loudest walls. The end. If this story moved, you don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales about courage, justice, and redemption. Tell us what part of Langston's journey hit you the hardest, and share where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. What did you think of the ending?